most of what you think you know about the world is wrong, not because you're unintelligent or poorly educated, but because myths spread faster than corrections. A compelling falsehood told once becomes common knowledge. The truth, when it finally emerges, struggles to catch up. You probably believe things right now that aren't true, have never been true, but feel true because you've heard them your entire life. This isn't your fault. It's how human knowledge transmission works. We inherit myths along with facts, and separating them requires effort most people never make. What follows are 50 of the most persistent myths, believed by millions, repeated confidently, and completely false. Some are harmless misconceptions. Others have shaped historical understanding in fundamental ways. All of them reveal how easily falsehood becomes accepted truth when nobody bothers to check. Settle in, let your mind relax, and prepare to question everything you thought you knew. Vikings never wore horned helmets. The iconic image of Vikings wearing horned helmets is completely fabricated. There is zero archaeological evidence that Vikings ever wore horned helmets in battle or daily life. Not one horned helmet has been recovered from Viking burial sites, settlements, or battlefields. The few horned helmets that have been found in Scandinavia date to the Bronze Age, over 1,000 years before the Viking era, and were likely ceremonial rather than military equipment. The myth originated in the 1800s when Romantic nationalism was sweeping Europe. Artists and costume designers working on productions of Wagner's operas decided that Vikings needed a more dramatic, barbaric appearance. They added horns to the helmets, and the image stuck in popular imagination. Victorian illustrations, historical paintings, and eventually films cemented the horned helmet as the definitive Viking look. Real Viking helmets were practical military equipment designed to protect the head during combat. They were rounded, often conical, made of iron, and sometimes featured a nose guard. Some had spectacle-like eye protection. They needed to deflect blows and arrows, not make theatrical statements. Horns on a helmet would be catastrophically impractical in battle. They'd catch weapon blows instead of deflecting them, provide leverage for an enemy to twist your head, and add unnecessary weight to equipment that already burdened the wearer. The horned helmet myth persists because it's visually distinctive and has become culturally embedded. Sports teams use horned helmets as logos. Movies and television shows depict Vikings with horns. The image is everywhere, reinforced constantly, despite being historically baseless. It's easier to repeat a compelling visual myth than to correct it with the truth that Viking helmets were boring, practical, and looked much like helmets from other medieval cultures. This myth matters because it exemplifies how modern invention can overwrite historical reality. What we think we know about Vikings comes largely from 19th century romantic fantasies, rather than archaeological evidence. The horned helmet is just the most obvious example. Much of the popular understanding of Viking culture, from their violence levels, to their exploration patterns, to their social structures, has been filtered through centuries of myth-making that bears little resemblance to what the archaeological record actually shows. You don't only use 10% of your brain. The persistent myth that humans only use 10% of their brains is neurological nonsense. Brain imaging studies show that over the course of a day, you use virtually all of your brain. There are no large dormant sections waiting to be unlocked. Even simple tasks activate multiple brain regions simultaneously. Sleeping activates different brain areas than waking, but it still involves significant neural activity throughout the brain. The myth likely originated from a misunderstanding of neuroscience research in the early 1900s. Scientists discovered that individual neurons fire only occasionally, and that much of the brain consists of glial cells that don't fire electrical signals the way neurons do. Someone apparently interpreted this to mean that most of the brain sits unused, waiting to be activated. The myth gained traction through self-help literature and pseudoscientific claims about untapped human potential. Brain damage studies definitively disprove the 10% myth. Damage to even small brain areas causes measurable deficits, strokes, tumors, and injuries that affect supposedly unused brain tissue always result in neurological or cognitive problems. If 90% of the brain were actually unused, damage to those areas wouldn't matter. Yet no brain region has been found where damage doesn't cause some impairment. Every part of the brain serves functions, even if those functions aren't always active simultaneously. Modern brain imaging makes the myth's falsity obvious. PET scans, fMRI, and other imaging technologies show blood flow and metabolic activity throughout the brain during various tasks. There are no dark zones representing unused capacity. Different tasks activate different networks, but over time all brain regions show activity. The brain accounts for only 2% of body weight, but consumes 20% of the body's energy. Evolution wouldn't maintain such an expensive organ if 90% of it served no purpose. The myth persists because it's flattering and opens possibilities for products and programs that claim to unlock your brain's full potential. It suggests that genius or exceptional ability is just a matter of accessing more brain power that's already there waiting. The truth is less marketable. You're already using all your brain, and improving cognitive performance requires hard work, learning, and practice, rather than unlocking dormant capacity. Napoleon Bonaparte was not particularly short. Napoleon Bonaparte stood approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall, which was average or slightly above average height for French men of his era. The myth that Napoleon was unusually short is based on confusion between French and British measurement systems and British propaganda that mocked the French emperor. French inches were longer than British inches. Napoleon's height, recorded in French measurements, translated to shorter in British measurements, causing confusion. Additionally, Napoleon's imperial guard were selected for exceptional height, often over 6 feet. Standing next to these deliberately tall soldiers made Napoleon appear shorter by comparison. British political cartoonists exploited this, depicting Napoleon as a tiny figure in propaganda illustrations meant to diminish his stature and authority. The propaganda nickname Little Corporal contributed to the myth, though the nickname had nothing to do with physical height. It was an affectionate term from soldiers referencing Napoleon's humble origins and his early rank, not his stature. The British seized on it for mockery, and the interpretation shifted over time until people believed Napoleon actually was physically small. Contemporary accounts from people who met Napoleon don't describe him as notably short. His autopsy recorded his height as 5 feet 2 inches in French measurements, which converts to 5 feet 7 inches in modern measurements. For context, the average French male height in the late 1700s and early 1800s was approximately 5 feet 5 inches. Napoleon was taller than average, not shorter. The myth endures because it's been repeated for over 2 centuries and has entered popular culture as established fact. It's also psychologically satisfying to imagine the great conqueror as physically small, creating an ironic contrast between his military ambitions and physical stature. The term Napoleon complex, describing aggressive behavior in shorter men trying to compensate for height, is based entirely on this myth about a man who wasn't actually short. Goldfish don't have 3-second memories. Goldfish have much better memories than the popular myth suggests. Studies have demonstrated that goldfish can remember and respond to training for at least 3 months, possibly longer. They can recognize different people, learn to navigate mazes, and be trained to perform tricks at specific times of day. Their cognitive abilities far exceed the 3-second myth that somehow became common knowledge. Researchers have trained goldfish to push levers for food, navigate obstacles, and respond to light signals. The fish remember these learned behaviors for months. In one experiment, goldfish learned to associate a sound with feeding time. Months later, when the sound was played, the goldfish immediately swam to the feeding area, demonstrating long-term memory retention. Other studies showed goldfish can distinguish between different shapes, colors, and locations, remembering these associations over extended periods. The 3-second memory myth probably arose because goldfish kept in small bowls appear bored and unstimulated, swimming in repetitive patterns. Observers misinterpreted this behavior as evidence of memory problems when it actually reflects inadequate housing conditions. Goldfish in properly sized aquariums with environmental enrichment display complex behaviors that demonstrate sophisticated memory and learning ability. Goldfish can also recognize individual humans who feed them, swimming to the front of the tank when those specific people approach. They learn the schedules of feeding times and become active in anticipation before food appears. They remember which areas of their environment contain food and which don't. These behaviors all require memory extending far beyond 3 seconds. The myth persists because it's convenient for people who keep goldfish in inadequate conditions. If goldfish truly had 3-second memories, then keeping them in small bowls wouldn't be cruel, because the fish would constantly forget their confinement. The truth is less comfortable. Goldfish are intelligent enough to be bored, stressed, and harmed by inadequate environments, and they remember those conditions continuously. The Great Wall of China is not visible from space. The Great Wall of China is not visible from space with the naked eye. Astronauts have repeatedly confirmed that the wall cannot be seen from low Earth orbit without magnification. The myth that it's the only human-made structure visible from space is completely false and has been definitively debunked by multiple astronauts who've looked for it and failed to see it. The myth dates to before spaceflight existed. An 1893 magazine article speculated that the wall might be visible from space, and the claim was repeated in various forms for decades. By the time humans actually reached space, the myth was so established that people accepted it as fact without checking. Early astronauts tried to see the wall and couldn't, but the myth persisted anyway. The wall is too narrow and its materials too similar in color to surrounding terrain for it to be distinguishable from orbit. The wall is generally 15 to 30 feet wide. From low Earth orbit, about 200 miles up, that's far too narrow to resolve with human vision. The wall's stone and earth construction blends with the natural terrain. There's insufficient contrast between the wall and its surroundings to make it visible against the much larger landscape features that are clearly visible from space. Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei specifically stated he could not see the Great Wall from space. Other astronauts have confirmed this. With cameras and magnification, sections of the wall can be photographed from orbit, but so can many other human structures. Highways, cities, airports, and agricultural areas are all more visible from space than the Great Wall. If anything human-made is visible from space, it's urban areas at night with their lights, not the Great Wall. The persistence of this myth demonstrates how comfortable falsehoods override factual corrections. Even after multiple astronauts have stated they cannot see the wall from space, the myth continues to appear in books, classrooms, and conversation. It sounds impressive, has nationalist appeal, and has been repeated so often that correcting it feels like undermining a cultural touchstone rather than stating a simple fact. Shaving does not make hair grow back thicker or darker. Hair does not grow back thicker, darker, or faster after shaving. This is one of the most persistent grooming myths, believed by millions, despite being anatomically impossible. Shaving cuts hair at the skin's surface and has no effect on the hair follicle below the skin where growth actually occurs. The follicle cannot detect that the hair shaft above has been cut. The myth persists because of how cut hair appears compared to uncut hair. Natural hair tapers to a fine point at the tip. When you shave, you cut across the thicker part of the hair shaft, creating a blunt edge. When this blunt-edged hair first emerges from the skin, it feels coarser than the fine-tipped hair that was there before. The hair hasn't actually changed thickness, but the change in edge geometry creates a different tactile sensation. Cut hair can also appear darker because the fine, sun-bleached tip has been removed, leaving the darker, unbleached portion of the hair shaft. Additionally, short stubble stands straight up from the skin rather than lying flat, which can make it more noticeable. These optical and tactile effects create the strong impression that shaving causes hair to grow back differently, even though the hair itself remains unchanged. Scientific studies have conclusively disproven the shaving myth. Researchers have measured hair growth rates, thickness, and color before and after shaving and found no changes. Hair growth is determined by genetics, hormones, and health factors, none of which are affected by shaving. The hair follicle, located beneath the skin surface, responds to hormonal and genetic signals, but has no mechanism to detect or respond to cutting of the hair shaft above. The myth has real-world consequences. Some people avoid shaving areas because they fear making the hair worse. Others start shaving young because they believe it will make their sparse adolescent facial hair thicken faster. Parents pass the myth to children, reinforcing it across generations. It persists despite being easily testable. If shaving made hair thicker and darker, barbers would eventually have hair so thick it couldn't be cut, which obviously doesn't happen. Lightning does strike the same place twice. Lightning frequently strikes the same place multiple times. Tall structures like skyscrapers and radio towers get struck by lightning dozens or even hundreds of times per year. The Empire State Building is struck approximately 25 times annually. Lightning follows the path of least resistance, and if a location was ideal for a strike once, it will likely be ideal again under similar conditions. The myth that lightning never strikes twice is based on the enormous statistical improbability of being struck by lightning at all. For any random point in a large area, the chance of a lightning strike is very low, making a second strike at the exact same point seem impossible. But the phrasing is misleading. Lightning doesn't choose randomly. It strikes based on physical factors like height, conductivity, and electrical charge distribution. Locations with favorable factors get struck repeatedly. Lightning rods exist specifically because lightning strikes the same places repeatedly. Buildings install them at the highest points, knowing those locations will be preferentially struck by lightning. The rod provides a safe pathway to ground, protecting the building. If lightning truly never struck the same place twice, lightning rods would only work once and then become useless, which clearly isn't the case. Individual people have been struck by lightning multiple times. Roy Sullivan, a U.S. park ranger, was struck 7 times over his career, surviving all strikes. Each strike was a separate event, not part of a single storm. Sullivan's case is exceptional, but multiple strike survivors aren't as rare as the myth suggests. The myth confuses statistical improbability with physical impossibility. The saying, "lightning never strikes twice," is meant as metaphor, suggesting that unlikely events won't repeat. But like many metaphors taken literally, it's factually wrong. Lightning behaves according to physics, not probability, and the same physical conditions that cause one strike will cause subsequent strikes. The myth persists because most people never think carefully about lightning behavior and accept the saying as literal truth rather than recognizing it as the metaphor it was meant to be. Bulls are not enraged by the color red. Bulls are colorblind to red. They cannot distinguish red from other colors and have no special reaction to the color red specifically. Matadors use red capes for tradition and visibility to the human audience, not because red enrages bulls. The bull responds to the cape's movement, not its color. Any moving object would provoke the same charging response. Bulls, like all cattle, have dichromatic vision. They see blues and greens relatively well, but have limited ability to see reds and oranges. To a bull, a red cape appears as a shade of yellow or gray, depending on lighting conditions. Studies testing color response in cattle have consistently shown they don't respond differently to red versus other colors. Movement, contrast, and novelty trigger responses, not specific hues. Matadors could use blue, green, yellow, or any other colored cape with identical results. The red color is theatrical tradition. likely chosen because red fabric hides bloodstains better than lighter colors, and because red appears dramatic to human spectators. The muleta, the small red cape used in the final stage of a bullfight, is red by convention, not function. Earlier stages of bullfights use magenta and yellow capes, and bulls charge these just as readily as red ones. The myth probably arose from casual observation of bullfights without understanding bull visual perception. Bulls charge the cape aggressively, people assume the red color causes the aggression, and the myth reinforces itself. The bull's actual motivations are complex, involving territorial instinct, stress from the bullfighting process, and response to a perceived threat, but color plays no role. The persistence of this myth is interesting because it's easily testable and has been definitively disproven by research on cattle vision, yet it remains common knowledge. It illustrates how confident people are about things they've never actually investigated. Most people have never tested a bull's response to different colors, have never studied cattle vision, and have never questioned the red cape myth. It simply sounds plausible enough that questioning it feels unnecessary. Mount Everest is not the tallest mountain on Earth. Mount Everest has the highest elevation above sea level at 29,032 feet, but it's not the tallest mountain on Earth when measured differently. Mauna Kea in Hawaii is taller when measured from base to summit. Mauna Kea extends 33,500 feet from its base on the ocean floor to its peak, making it over 4,000 feet taller than Everest. Most of Mauna Kea is underwater, which is why Everest holds the elevation record despite being shorter overall. The distinction matters because it reveals how definitions shape facts. Tallest and highest are not synonyms. Tallest means the greatest distance from base to peak. Highest means the greatest elevation above a reference point, typically sea level. Everest is the highest mountain. Mauna Kea is the tallest. Using different definitions produces different answers, but popular understanding conflates the two and assumes Everest wins by all measures. Even the highest designation has complications. Chimborazo in Ecuador has a summit farther from Earth's center than Everest due to the planet's equatorial bulge. Earth is not a perfect sphere, it bulges at the equator. Chimborazo is located near the equator at 1 degree south latitude, while Everest sits at 28 degrees north. The equatorial bulge places Chimborazo's summit about 2,000 meters farther from Earth's center than Everest's summit, despite Chimborazo having a lower elevation above sea level. If measuring the mountain's height from the center of the Earth, Chimborazo wins. If measuring total height from base to summit, Mauna Kea wins. If measuring elevation above sea level, Everest wins. Each measurement method is valid depending on what you're trying to determine. Everest is the highest point you can stand on Earth, but calling it the tallest mountain requires ignoring how height is measured for every other object. The Everest myth persists because the mountain has immense cultural significance as the ultimate climbing challenge, and because the distinction between highest and tallest requires careful thinking that most people never apply. Saying Mauna Kea is taller than Everest sounds wrong even though it's true, so people dismiss the correction rather than updating their understanding. Medieval people did not think the Earth was flat. Educated people in medieval Europe knew the Earth was spherical. The flat Earth myth is a modern invention used to portray medieval people as ignorant. Ancient Greeks calculated the Earth's circumference with reasonable accuracy, and this knowledge was never lost in medieval Europe. Medieval scholars, sailors, and educated people understood the Earth was round. The myth that medieval people believed in a flat Earth was popularized in the 1800s by writers constructing narratives of scientific progress triumphing over religious superstition. Washington Irving's biography of Columbus portrayed Columbus as enlightened in his belief in a spherical Earth, while his contemporaries supposedly clung to flat Earth beliefs. This was complete fiction. Columbus's opponents weren't arguing about the Earth's shape, but about the distance to Asia. They correctly calculated that sailing west to reach Asia would require crossing a much greater distance than Columbus claimed. Columbus was wrong about the distance. His critics were right. Medieval texts, maps, and scholarly works consistently describe a spherical Earth. The calculations for lunar eclipses, the visible difference in star positions at different latitudes, and the disappearance of ships over the horizon all require a spherical Earth. Medieval scholars discuss these concepts routinely. Religious authorities had no problem with a spherical Earth. It appeared in religious artwork and theology without controversy. The myth that the Catholic Church persecuted Galileo for proving the Earth was round is also false. Galileo's conflict with the Church concerned heliocentrism, whether the Earth orbited the Sun or vice versa, not the Earth's shape. By Galileo's time in the early 1600s, the spherical Earth had been accepted fact for over 2,000 years. The Church's opposition to Galileo was about Earth's motion, not its shape. The flat Earth myth persists because it serves modern purposes, portraying earlier eras as ignorant and contemporary understanding as enlightened. It creates a satisfying narrative of progress from superstition to reason. The truth is messier. Medieval people understood some things correctly, other things incorrectly, and knowledge progresses unevenly rather than in simple narratives of darkness giving way to light. Chameleons don't change color to match their background. Chameleons change color primarily for temperature regulation, communication, and emotional states, not camouflage. The myth that chameleons match their backgrounds like adaptive wallpaper is widespread but inaccurate. Chameleons have limited color ranges determined by their species and cannot produce arbitrary colors to match any background. Chameleons change color through specialized cells in their skin called chromatophores, which contain different colored pigments. By expanding or contracting these cells, chameleons can shift between colors within their species range. However, they can't match patterns they've never encountered or colors outside their biological palette. A chameleon placed on a bright blue surface won't turn bright blue unless blue is already in that species' color repertoire. Color changes serve social communication. Male chameleons brighten to display dominance or courtship readiness. Defeated males darken to show submission. Females display specific colors to signal receptiveness or rejection to males. These color signals communicate mood and intent to other chameleons. Temperature regulation also drives color changes. Darker colors absorb more heat, useful for warming up in cool conditions, while lighter colors reflect heat when the chameleon needs to cool down. Some color changes do provide camouflage, but this is different from actively matching backgrounds. A chameleon's baseline coloration often matches its typical habitat: green species in leafy environments, brown species in bark-heavy areas. Stress can cause color changes that happen to make the chameleon less visible, but this is instinctive response to danger, not deliberate background matching. The chameleon is responding to its internal state, not assessing its surroundings and adjusting to match. The myth persists because chameleons do change color, which is remarkable enough that people assume the most dramatic possible explanation: real-time camouflage. The truth that color change serves temperature regulation and communication is less exciting than the myth of instant camouflage, so the myth dominates popular understanding despite being wrong. Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. Thomas Edison did not invent the electric light bulb. He improved existing designs and developed the first commercially practical incandescent light bulb system. Over 20 inventors created various electric lights before Edison's patent in 1879. Humphrey Davy demonstrated electric lights in 1802. Joseph Swan patented a working incandescent bulb in Britain in 1878, a year before Edison's patent. Edison's innovation was creating a complete electrical distribution system that made light bulbs practical for widespread use. Earlier light bulbs faced problems that limited their commercial viability. They burned out quickly, required too much power, were fragile, or were prohibitively expensive. Edison's contribution was systematic experimentation to solve these problems. He tested thousands of materials for the filament, eventually settling on carbonized bamboo, which lasted over 1,200 hours. He developed improved vacuum pumps to remove air from the bulbs, preventing the filament from oxidizing. He designed electrical generators and distribution systems to deliver power to homes and businesses. Edison's genius was understanding that inventing a light bulb wasn't enough. He needed an entire infrastructure to make electric lighting practical and affordable. He created power plants, electrical wiring systems, switches, fuses, meters, and all the supporting technology needed for widespread adoption. He approached electric lighting as a system rather than a single invention, which is why his version succeeded commercially while earlier versions remained laboratory curiosities. The myth that Edison invented the light bulb arose partly from Edison's own self-promotion. He was an effective marketer who understood the value of publicity. He didn't necessarily claim to be the sole inventor, but he didn't vigorously correct people who gave him full credit either. Over time, nuance was lost, and Edison became synonymous with the light bulb in popular understanding. This myth matters because it misrepresents how innovation actually works. Inventions are rarely the work of solitary geniuses having breakthrough moments. They're typically iterative improvements by many people over extended periods. Edison's contribution was essential, but so were the contributions of dozens of other inventors. Reducing the light bulb's development to one man erases a complex history of collaborative innovation and creates false expectations about how technological progress occurs. You cannot see the Great Wall of China from the moon. The Great Wall of China is definitely not visible from the moon with the naked eye or with any telescope. At the moon's distance of about 240,000 miles, the Great Wall, at 30 feet wide, would be far too small to see. To put this in perspective, resolving an object 30 feet wide from 240,000 miles would require impossibly precise vision, far beyond human capability or current telescope technology. The myth is an extension of the false claim that the wall is visible from low Earth orbit, elevated to an even more dramatic and completely impossible claim. The moon is roughly 1,000 times farther from Earth than the International Space Station. If you can't see the wall from 250 miles away, you certainly can't see it from 240,000 miles away. The claim is physically impossible. From the moon, you can see continents, oceans, cloud patterns, and ice caps on Earth. Individual human-made structures, even large cities, are not visible. The Great Wall is far too narrow and doesn't have sufficient contrast with its surroundings to be visible at that distance. The wall blends into the landscape at scales far smaller than the moon's distance from Earth. This myth might have started as rhetorical exaggeration that was taken literally. Someone might have said the wall is so long that you could see it from the moon, meaning it's impressively long, not that it's literally visible from the moon. Listeners took the statement literally, and it became repeated as fact. Alternatively, the myth might have evolved from confusion about the low orbit visibility myth, escalating the false claim to an even more impressive but equally false version. The persistence of this myth demonstrates how impressive sounding claims spread without critical examination. The statement that the Great Wall is visible from the moon sounds amazing and makes the wall seem even more impressive, so people repeat it without checking whether it's physically possible. The myth has more narrative power than the mundane truth that the wall, despite being very long, is too narrow to be visible from great distances. Cracking your knuckles does not cause arthritis. Cracking knuckles does not cause arthritis. Multiple studies have found no connection between habitual knuckle cracking and arthritis development. The cracking sound comes from gas bubbles forming and popping in the synovial fluid between joints. This process does not damage joint cartilage or increase arthritis risk. The myth probably originated from the unsettling sound of cracking knuckles, which sounds like it must be doing damage. People assumed that something that sounds destructive must be harmful. Parents told children to stop cracking their knuckles to avoid arthritis, and the myth propagated across generations without anyone checking whether it was true. Research specifically examining long-term knuckle crackers has found no increased incidence of arthritis in cracked joints compared to non-cracked joints. One researcher famously cracked the knuckles of only his left hand for over 60 years while leaving his right hand uncracked. He developed no arthritis in either hand, and there was no difference between hands in arthritis markers. While this is just one case, it aligns with broader studies showing no connection. The actual causes of arthritis include genetics, age, joint injury, infection, and autoimmune conditions. Mechanical wear from repetitive joint stress can contribute to osteoarthritis, but the temporary pressure changes from knuckle cracking are far too mild to cause cartilage damage. If anything, knuckle cracking might slightly increase joint mobility, though any benefits are minor and not worth doing purely for therapeutic purposes. Some habitual knuckle crackers do develop slightly reduced grip strength or hand swelling over decades, but this is not arthritis. It's minor soft tissue effects that don't involve joint degradation. These effects are relatively uncommon and mild compared to the joint destruction that arthritis causes. The myth incorrectly conflates any negative hand effects with arthritis, creating exaggerated fears about a harmless habit. The myth persists because it's been taught as fact for so long that correcting it feels wrong. People who've spent decades believing knuckle cracking causes arthritis resist the correction, sometimes becoming annoyed with younger people who crack their knuckles. The myth has become a piece of generational wisdom that people are reluctant to abandon even when shown evidence that it's false. Bats are not blind. Bats are not blind. All bat species can see, and many have quite good vision. The saying, "blind as a bat," is completely inaccurate. While many bats rely heavily on echolocation for navigation and hunting, this doesn't mean they can't see. Echolocation supplements vision rather than replacing it, and some bat species rely more on vision than echolocation. Fruit bats and other megabats have large eyes and excellent vision adapted for spotting fruit in trees and navigating through complex forest canopies. These species use vision as their primary sense, rarely echolocating. Their eyes are proportionally larger than those of many comparable mammals. They navigate at dusk and night using vision in low light conditions that would challenge human sight. Even microbats that rely heavily on echolocation can see. Their eyes are smaller and less developed than fruit bats, but they function. Studies have shown that microbats use vision for long-range navigation and orienting themselves, switching to echolocation for close-range obstacle avoidance and prey capture. The two senses work together, with each providing information the other cannot. The blind bat myth probably arose because bats are nocturnal and navigate successfully in complete darkness where human vision fails. Observers assumed that because bats fly at night, they must be blind and using some other sense. When echolocation was discovered, it reinforced the myth by providing an alternative explanation for bat navigation that didn't require vision. People concluded that bats echolocate because they're blind, when actually they echolocate because it's extraordinarily effective for their hunting strategy. The myth persists in language even after being debunked. Blind as a bat remains a common expression, despite being factually wrong. Language changes slowly, and familiar phrases outlast the beliefs that generated them. People continue using the expression without thinking about whether it's literally true, and the myth is reinforced every time someone hears the phrase. Dropping a penny from a skyscraper won't kill someone. A penny dropped from a tall building will not gain enough velocity to kill someone on the ground. The penny's terminal velocity, the maximum speed it reaches while falling, is only about 30 to 50 miles per hour due to air resistance. At that speed, a penny might sting but wouldn't cause serious injury, certainly not death. The myth assumes that objects fall with constantly increasing speed until they hit something. In vacuum, this would be true. In air, objects accelerate only until air resistance equals gravitational force, at which point they stop accelerating and fall at constant velocity. For a penny, which has large surface area relative to its mass, air resistance limits its falling speed to relatively low velocities. The exact terminal velocity depends on the penny's orientation. Falling flat, the penny has more surface area and falls slower. Falling edge first, it has less surface area and falls faster. Even at maximum speed, falling edge first, a penny lacks the mass and velocity to penetrate skin or cause serious harm. It would hurt if it hit you, comparable to being flicked hard, but it wouldn't kill you or cause serious injury. People have actually tested this myth, though not ethically, by dropping pennies onto unwitting pedestrians. Tests using ballistic gel and other materials show that pennies dropped from tall buildings don't have sufficient kinetic energy to cause serious damage. The myth persists because people intuitively believe that dropping anything from a great height must be dangerous, without considering how air resistance affects small, light objects. The myth also persists because it contains an implicit warning about the dangers of dropping objects from heights, which is legitimate even if the specific example is wrong. Dropping a penny won't kill anyone, but dropping a heavier object certainly could. The myth might function as simplified teaching. Don't drop things from tall buildings, even if the penny example used to illustrate the danger is actually harmless. Einstein did not fail math as a student. Albert Einstein did not fail mathematics in school. He was consistently excellent at math throughout his education. The myth that Einstein failed math is completely false and contradicts all available records of his academic performance. Einstein himself addressed this myth, saying, "I never failed in mathematics. Before I was 15, I had mastered differential and integral calculus." School records show Einstein excelled in mathematics and physics from an early age. He struggled with some subjects, particularly languages and rote memorization tasks, but mathematics was never among his weak areas. By age 12, he had taught himself advanced mathematics through independent study. His problems in school related to his rebellious attitude toward authority and rigid German educational systems, not his academic abilities in mathematics and science. The myth likely arose from confusion about the Swiss grading system. In some regions of Switzerland, 1 is the highest grade and 6 is the lowest. In other regions, the reverse is true. Someone looking at Einstein's grade records without understanding the grading system might have seen ones in mathematics and assumed they indicated failure when they actually indicated excellence. This confusion, repeated and embellished over time, became the myth that Einstein failed math. Another source might be the desire to find comfort in the idea that even genius struggled with basics. If Einstein failed math and still became a brilliant physicist, then current struggles with mathematics might not predict future failure. The myth is reassuring to people struggling with math, providing hope that struggle doesn't preclude eventual success. Unfortunately, the reassurance is based on fiction. The myth's persistence is particularly ironic, given that Einstein's contributions to physics were deeply mathematical. His theories of special and general relativity require sophisticated mathematical frameworks. Someone who failed math couldn't have developed these theories. The math in Einstein's published papers clearly demonstrates expert-level mathematical ability. Yet, the myth that he failed math continues to circulate, apparently untroubled by the obvious contradiction. Sugar does not make children hyperactive. Scientific studies have consistently found no connection between sugar consumption and hyperactivity in children. Double-blind trials where children consume sugar or placebo without parents or observers knowing which they received show no differences in behavior. The hyperactivity parents observe after children eat sugary foods is likely due to context, expectations, and parental bias rather than the sugar itself. The myth persists partly because of confirmation bias. Parents expect children to become hyperactive after eating sugar, so they notice and remember hyperactive behavior that follows sugar consumption while ignoring calm behavior or hyperactivity that occurs without sugar. Birthday parties, holidays, and other exciting events often involve both sugar and hyperactivity, creating a spurious correlation. The excitement and stimulation of these events causes the hyperactivity. The sugar is coincidentally present. Studies where parents are told their children received sugar but actually received placebo show that parents rate their children as more hyperactive, even though the children's behavior doesn't change. The parental expectation alone is sufficient to alter perception of the child's behavior. Parents see what they expect to see, interpreting normal active behavior as hyperactivity when they believe the child has consumed sugar. Some children do experience genuine behavioral changes from sugar, but these cases involve medical conditions like insulin resistance or sugar metabolism problems, not normal response to sugar. For the vast majority of children without these conditions, sugar consumption doesn't affect behavior. The myth that all children become hyperactive from sugar is not supported by research. The myth has real consequences. Parents restrict children's sugar intake based on behavioral concerns, even though the restriction doesn't affect behavior. Children learn to associate sugar with hyperactivity, potentially developing expectations that create self-fulfilling prophecies. Medical advice gets ignored because parents trust folk wisdom about sugar and hyperactivity more than research showing no connection. The myth persists because it feels true, the correlation seems obvious from casual observation, and correcting it requires accepting that parental intuition about their own children's behavior can be systematically wrong. Most parents are reluctant to accept that their observations of their children might be biased by expectations rather than reflecting objective reality. Coffee is not made from beans. Coffee is not made from beans. Coffee beans are actually seeds from the coffee plant's fruit, which are called coffee cherries. The seeds are called beans because they resemble beans in appearance, not because they actually are beans in the botanical sense. True beans are legumes. Coffee seeds are not. The coffee plant produces red or purple fruits that look like cherries. Inside each cherry are typically two seeds pressed against each other with flat sides facing inward. These seeds are processed, dried, roasted, and ground to make coffee. Calling them beans is technically incorrect, but universally understood, so the misnomer has become standard terminology, even though it's botanically wrong. This misunderstanding doesn't affect coffee consumption or preparation, but it's representative of how common terms often don't match scientific classifications. Many food names reflect appearance or historical confusion rather than taxonomic accuracy. Coffee beans, strawberries, and peanuts are all named misleadingly. Strawberries aren't berries, bananas are. Peanuts aren't nuts, they're legumes. The myth persists because coffee bean is so entrenched in language that correcting it feels pedantic. Everyone understands what coffee beans means, even if the term is technically wrong. Language prioritizes communication over precision, so misleading but functional terms persist. Most coffee drinkers never think about whether coffee beans are actually beans, and for practical purposes, it doesn't matter. This particular myth illustrates how much of daily language involves simplified or incorrect naming that works well enough for communication. We call sunfish fish even though they're not fish. We call jellyfish fish even though they're not fish. We call lightning bugs bugs even though they're beetles. The names work for identification purposes, so technical inaccuracy is tolerated in favor of linguistic convenience. Camels do not store water in their humps. Camels' humps store fat, not water. This is one of the most persistent animal myths, believed by millions despite being completely wrong. The hump's fat reserves allow camels to survive in deserts, but through metabolic processes rather than direct water storage. When camels metabolize the fat, one of the byproducts is water, but the hump itself doesn't contain liquid water. The fat in a camel's hump can weigh up to 80 pounds. When the camel needs energy and hasn't eaten for extended periods, it metabolizes this fat, producing energy, carbon dioxide, and water through normal cellular respiration. The water produced by fat metabolism does help the camel survive, but it's generated as needed rather than stored in advance. An empty hump on a depleted camel is soft and floppy, not dry, because it was never filled with water to begin with. Camels have numerous adaptations for desert survival beyond their humps. They have specialized kidneys that produce highly concentrated urine, minimizing water loss. They can tolerate large temperature swings, allowing their body temperature to rise during the day and fall at night, reducing the need for evaporative cooling through sweating. They can lose up to 25% of their body weight through dehydration and recover rapidly when water becomes available. These adaptations matter more for desert survival than the hump's fat storage. The myth probably arose because people knew camels survive in deserts without frequent drinking and assumed water storage must be involved. The hump is the most distinctive feature of camels, so it became the presumed storage site. This explanation sounds reasonable enough that it was repeated without verification, becoming common knowledge despite being wrong. The myth persists because it's taught to children in schools and books, often by teachers who learned the same myth and never questioned it. Once something enters educational materials, it gets repeated across generations. Correcting the myth requires updating textbooks, retraining teachers, and convincing people that what they learned in school was wrong, a difficult process that happens slowly, if at all. Different parts of the tongue do not taste different flavors. The tongue map, showing different areas responsible for tasting sweet, salty, sour, and bitter flavors, is complete fiction. All areas of the tongue can detect all flavors. There are no specialized regions for specific tastes. The tongue map myth is based on a mistranslation and misinterpretation of early taste research that somehow became standard educational material. The myth originated from research published in 1901 by German scientist David Hanig. Hanig measured taste sensitivity across the tongue and found slight variations in sensitivity to different tastes at different locations. These differences were minor, and Hanig never claimed that specific areas could only taste specific flavors. His data showed that all areas of the tongue could taste all flavors, with some areas being slightly more sensitive to certain tastes. In 1942, an American psychologist misinterpreted Hanig's data, creating exaggerated graphs that made the subtle differences look like absolute divisions. These distorted graphs were then reproduced in textbooks, often with color coding that suggested clear boundaries between taste regions. The tongue map became standard educational content, taught to generations of students despite being based on misunderstood research. Anyone can personally disprove the tongue map with simple experiments. Place sugar, salt, lemon juice, and tonic water on different parts of your tongue. You'll taste each substance regardless of where it touches your tongue. The supposed bitter region at the back tastes sweet things just fine. The supposed sweet region at the tip tastes bitter things without problem. The direct sensory evidence contradicts the tongue map, yet the myth persists. Taste works through receptor cells distributed across the entire tongue surface. These receptors respond to different flavor molecules, and all receptor types are found throughout the tongue, though not always in equal densities. Modern neuroscience has completely dismantled the tongue map concept, yet it continues appearing in textbooks and classrooms, demonstrating how difficult correcting educational content can be once errors become entrenched. Waking a sleepwalker is not dangerous. Waking a sleepwalker will not harm them. This myth has no medical basis. The concern seems to be that sudden waking might cause heart attack or psychological trauma, but there's no evidence supporting these fears. The actual risk is that a disoriented sleepwalker might be startled and react unpredictably, potentially causing injury to themselves or the person trying to wake them, but this is not the same as waking them being inherently dangerous. The myth probably originated from dramatic reactions sleepwalkers sometimes have when woken. A person in deep sleep suddenly confronted can be confused, frightened, or disoriented. This moment of confusion might look medically dangerous when it's actually just normal disorientation that passes quickly. Observers misinterpreted the confusion as evidence of harm rather than recognizing it as a temporary state. Sleep medicine experts actually recommend waking sleepwalkers if they're in danger or engaging in risky behavior. The preferred method is gentle. Speak calmly, guide them gently, or make enough noise to wake them naturally rather than shaking them violently. But waking them is not dangerous. It's often necessary for their safety. A sleepwalker heading toward stairs or out a door needs to be woken to prevent actual injury. The greater danger is not waking the sleepwalker and allowing them to injure themselves while asleep. Sleepwalking can involve complex behaviors, including leaving the house, operating vehicles, or cooking, all performed while essentially unconscious. The risks of allowing these behaviors to continue far outweigh any risk from waking the person. The myth persists because it's been repeated for generations as parental wisdom. Parents tell children not to wake sleepwalkers. Children grow up and tell their children the same thing, and the myth propagates without anyone questioning its medical validity. Like many folk beliefs about health and safety, it sounds plausible enough that questioning it feels unnecessary. Humans have more than 5 senses. Humans have many more than 5 senses. The traditional 5 senses, sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, are an oversimplified classification that ignores numerous other sensory systems. Proprioception senses body position and movement. Equilibrioception senses balance and spatial orientation. Thermoception senses temperature. Nociception senses pain. These are distinct sensory systems with dedicated receptors and neural pathways, not subcategories of the traditional 5. Touch itself is not a single sense, but multiple senses grouped under one label. Separate receptor systems detect pressure, vibration, texture, pain, heat, and cold. These are different sensory modalities that happen to all involve the skin. Lumping them together as touch creates the illusion of 5 neat categories when the actual sensory system is much more complex. Internal senses monitor body conditions that aren't consciously perceived as discrete senses, but are essential for survival. Chemoreceptors in blood vessels detect oxygen, carbon dioxide, and pH levels, regulating breathing without conscious awareness. Stretch receptors in organs signal fullness, thirst, and various visceral states. These systems continuously monitor body function and adjust behavior to maintain homeostasis. The 5-sense model dates to Aristotle, who categorized the senses in ways that seemed logical with ancient understanding of human biology. The classification stuck because it's simple, memorable, and adequate for most everyday purposes. Modern neuroscience recognizes far more than 5 sensory systems, but the traditional model persists in popular understanding because updating it requires changing educational content and common language. The myth matters because it creates an artificially limited understanding of human sensory experience. People think they're only receiving information through 5 channels when actually dozens of sensory systems are continuously operating. Recognizing the full range of human sensation provides better understanding of how perception works and why sensory integration is so complex. You do not lose most body heat through your head. The myth that you lose most of your body heat through your head is false. Heat loss occurs proportionally to surface area. Your head accounts for about 10% of body surface area, so you lose about 10% of body heat through your head, assuming all body parts are equally exposed. The head doesn't lose heat faster than other body parts when accounting for surface area. The myth originated from a flawed military study in the 1950s that measured heat loss in subjects wearing Arctic survival suits. The subjects' bodies were covered, but their heads were exposed. Predictably, they lost significant heat through their uncovered heads, not because heads lose heat faster, but because heads were the only exposed skin. The study's results were misinterpreted, and the myth that heads are special heat loss zones became military doctrine and eventually common knowledge. If you went outside in winter wearing only a hat and nothing else, you'd lose far more heat through your naked torso, arms, and legs than through your covered head. Any exposed body part loses heat. The head seems to lose more heat because people often leave heads uncovered while bundling the rest of the body. The comparison is between covered and uncovered skin, not between heads and other body parts. The myth has been directly tested in controlled conditions. Studies measuring heat loss from different body regions show the head loses heat at the same rate per unit area as other body parts. Some regions, like hands and feet, actually lose heat slightly faster due to higher surface area to volume ratios and less insulating fat. The head is not special in terms of heat loss. The myth persists partly because it's taught by parents and coaches trying to encourage children to wear hats in cold weather. The advice to wear a hat is good, but the justification is wrong. Wear a hat because covering exposed skin reduces heat loss, not because your head loses heat faster than other body parts. The myth survives as a parenting strategy that happens to produce good behavior even though the reasoning is flawed. Seasons are not caused by Earth's distance from the sun. Seasons are not caused by Earth's distance from the sun. They're caused by Earth's axial tilt. Earth's axis is tilted 23.5 degrees relative to its orbital plane. This tilt means that during part of the year, the northern hemisphere tilts toward the sun, receiving more direct sunlight and experiencing summer. 6 months later, the northern hemisphere tilts away from the sun, receiving less direct sunlight and experiencing winter. The southern hemisphere experiences opposite seasons because when one hemisphere tilts toward the sun, the other tilts away. Earth's orbit is slightly elliptical, meaning Earth's distance from the sun varies over the year. However, Earth is actually closest to the sun in January during Northern Hemisphere winter and farthest from the sun in July during Northern Hemisphere summer. If distance caused seasons, January would be hot and July would be cold in the Northern Hemisphere. The fact that the opposite occurs proves distance doesn't cause seasons. The angle of incoming sunlight matters far more than distance. When the Northern Hemisphere tilts toward the sun, sunlight hits at a steeper angle, concentrating energy over smaller surface areas and creating warmer temperatures. When tilted away, sunlight hits at a shallow angle, spreading energy over larger surface areas and creating cooler temperatures. This angle effect is so strong that it overwhelms the minor distance variation. The myth persists because Earth's elliptical orbit seems like it should cause temperature variation, and people don't instinctively understand how much axial tilt affects sunlight angle. Distance seems like the obvious explanation for temperature changes over the year. Teaching the correct explanation requires diagrams and spatial reasoning that's harder to convey than the simple but wrong distance explanation. This myth is commonly held even by educated people and sometimes appears in educational materials. It represents a case where the intuitive explanation is wrong, but feels so right that even correction doesn't always stick. People taught the correct explanation often revert to the distance explanation because it makes more intuitive sense, even though it's incorrect. Hair and fingernails do not continue growing after death. Hair and fingernails do not continue growing after death. This myth is based on an optical illusion caused by post-mortem changes to the body. After death, the body dehydrates and skin shrinks and retracts. This shrinkage exposes more of the hair shaft and nail that was previously below the skin surface, creating the illusion that they've grown. The hair and nails haven't actually gotten longer. The surrounding skin has pulled back. Hair growth requires active cell division in the hair follicle, which requires energy from metabolism. Fingernail growth similarly requires living cells to divide and keratinize. After death, metabolism stops, cells stop dividing, and growth immediately ceases. Dead bodies don't produce energy, so they can't power cell growth. The idea that hair and nails somehow continue growing after death violates basic biology. The illusion is convincing because the exposure of additional hair and nail can amount to several millimeters over the days following death. This visible change is enough to create the strong impression of growth. Combined with decomposition making precise observation difficult, the impression that nails and hair grew becomes accepted as fact by observers. The myth is perpetuated by its appearance in literature and film, where growing hair and nails on corpses create horror elements. These fictional depictions reinforce the myth's plausibility. People encountering the myth in multiple contexts, urban legends, stories, and supposed eyewitness accounts, conclude it must be true even though it contradicts basic biology. This myth persists despite being easily debunked by understanding how cell growth works. Active growth requires living cells with functioning metabolism. Dead cells can't grow. The mechanism behind the illusion, skin dehydration and retraction, is straightforward and explains all observations without requiring impossible biology. Yet the myth continues because the visual evidence seems compelling if you don't understand the mechanism creating it. You cannot fold a piece of paper more than 7 times. The claim that you cannot fold a piece of paper in half more than 7 or 8 times has been definitively disproven. While regular paper becomes increasingly difficult to fold after several folds due to thickness accumulation and geometric constraints, it's not impossible to exceed 7 folds. The limitations are practical rather than fundamental. The challenge is that each fold doubles the paper's thickness. After 6 folds, a 0.1 millimeter thick paper is now 6.4 millimeters thick. After 7 folds, it's 12.8 millimeters. The paper becomes increasingly rigid and resistant to further folding. The large folded bundle also becomes difficult to grip and manipulate. These practical limitations stop most folding attempts at 7 or 8 folds. High school student Brittany Gallivan derived the mathematical formula governing paper folding limits in 2002 and then demonstrated folding paper 12 times using a 4,000-foot-long sheet of toilet paper. She had to use extremely long paper to make the fold geometry work, but she definitively proved that 7 folds is not a fundamental limit. The limit is determined by paper length, thickness, and the direction of folding. Others have since folded paper more than 7 times using various methods. Using hydraulic presses and specialized paper, folders have exceeded Gallivan's record. The myth arose because most people attempting to fold regular paper in half multiple times can't get past 7 folds, leading to the assumption that 7 is a physical limit rather than a practical difficulty. The myth persists because it's presented as a challenge that invites testing, and most people who try it fail to exceed 7 folds, confirming the myth in their personal experience. The myth becomes self-reinforcing. People try, fail at 7 folds, and conclude the myth is true without realizing that success requires either very large paper or specialized equipment. Ostriches do not bury their heads in sand. Ostriches do not bury their heads in sand when frightened. This is complete fiction with no basis in ostrich behavior. Ostriches have large eyes and excellent vision, and they rely on sight to detect danger. Blinding themselves by burying their heads would be counterproductive and potentially fatal. The myth contradicts everything known about ostrich survival strategies. The myth might have originated from observing ostriches lowering their heads to ground level. Ostriches periodically lower their heads to turn their eggs in ground nests. From a distance, an ostrich with its head lowered to the ground might appear to have its head buried, especially if the observation is brief or the observer doesn't understand what they're seeing. This behavior was misinterpreted and exaggerated into the head-burying myth. Another possible origin is ostriches dropping flat on the ground when they sense danger, pressing their long necks flat against the earth to minimize their profile. From a distance in shimmering heat, a prone ostrich might seem to disappear into the landscape, creating the impression that it buried itself. Observers unfamiliar with this defensive behavior might have concluded the bird was burying its head. When actually threatened, ostriches run. They're the fastest birds on Earth. capable of sprinting at speeds up to 45 miles per hour. Running is their primary defense, and they can maintain high speeds for long distances. If cornered and unable to escape, ostriches will fight, delivering powerful kicks with their strong legs. They never respond to danger by burying their heads. The myth persists as a metaphor for ignoring problems rather than as a believed fact about actual ostrich behavior. People use the phrase burying your head in the sand like an ostrich without necessarily believing ostriches actually do this. The metaphor has outlived belief in the literal behavior, maintaining the myth in language even as people recognize it's not literally true. The Coriolis effect does not determine toilet water rotation direction. Toilet water and sink drains don't swirl in different directions in the northern and southern hemispheres due to the Coriolis effect. The Coriolis effect is real and does affect large-scale systems like hurricanes and ocean currents, but it's far too weak to influence small bodies of water like toilets or sinks. The direction water swirls when draining is determined by the basin's shape, the angle of water jets, and existing currents in the water, not by Earth's rotation. The Coriolis effect results from Earth's rotation, which causes moving objects to deflect from straight-line paths. The effect is only noticeable over large distances and time scales. It influences trade winds, ocean currents, and weather systems. For these large-scale phenomena, the Coriolis effect is significant and measurable. For a toilet bowl 2 feet across, the effect is negligible. Tests in carefully controlled conditions using symmetric basins with perfectly still water and precisely centered drains have shown that even then, tiny asymmetries and disturbances overpower any Coriolis influence. In real-world conditions, with asymmetric toilet bowls, angled water jets, and residual motion in the water, Coriolis effects are completely irrelevant. The drain direction is random or determined by basin design, not by hemisphere. Toilets in the same hemisphere can swirl in different directions depending on how the water jets are angled. In fact, toilets in the same building on the same floor can swirl differently. If Coriolis effects determined drain direction, this would be impossible. The myth is easily tested. Find 2 toilets in your area and check whether they consistently swirl the same direction. They won't. The myth persists because it's taught as an interesting fact about Coriolis effects and because Coriolis effects really do influence large systems, lending plausibility to the claim that they affect small systems too. The explanation sounds scientific and involves real physics, making it convincing even though it's wrong. Testing the claim requires careful observation that most people never perform, so the myth survives on authority rather than evidence. Glass is not a slow-moving liquid. Old glass windows are sometimes thicker at the bottom than the top, which has led to the myth that glass is an extremely slow-moving liquid that flows downward over centuries. This is false. Glass is an amorphous solid, not a liquid. The thickness variation in old windows is due to manufacturing processes, not glass flow. Historic glass was made through methods like crown glass or cylinder glass processes that didn't produce uniform thickness. When installing windows, glaziers often placed the thicker edge at the bottom for stability. The non-uniform thickness was built into the glass during manufacturing, not caused by flow after installation. Glass from the same era shows thickness variations in random orientations when installation direction is unknown, proving the variation isn't caused by downward flow. If glass flowed over time, ancient glass objects should show deformation. Roman glass artifacts, nearly 2,000 years old, show no signs of flow. Medieval stained glass windows, hundreds of years old, don't show the dragging or sagging that would result from viscous flow. The glass remains crisp and clear with no evidence of movement. If glass flowed on century timescales, these ancient objects would be deformed. Glass is technically an amorphous solid, a solid that lacks the crystalline structure of most solids, but is nonetheless solid. Its atoms are not in a regular crystalline lattice, but they're not mobile the way liquid molecules are. At room temperature, Glass atoms are essentially fixed in position. Glass would take longer than the age of the universe to flow measurably at room temperature. The myth persists because it sounds plausible. Glass seems like it should be between solid and liquid, and old windows do have variable thickness. The explanation that glass slowly flows sounds more interesting than the mundane truth that old manufacturing processes produced non-uniform glass. Like many myths, this one survives because the truth is less exciting than the fiction. Peanuts are not nuts. Peanuts are not nuts. They're legumes, more closely related to beans and peas than to tree nuts like almonds or walnuts. The confusion arises because peanuts are used culinarily like nuts and called nuts in common language, but botanically, they're completely different from true nuts. True nuts are hard-shelled fruits where the seed and fruit wall are fused. Walnuts, almonds, and hazelnuts are true nuts. Peanuts develop underground in pods, and the shell is the pod, not the fruit wall. Each peanut is a seed inside the pod. This growth pattern is characteristic of legumes, not nuts. When you shell a peanut, you're opening a pod to remove seeds, exactly as you would with beans or peas. The distinction matters for people with nut allergies. Many people with tree nut allergies can eat peanuts safely because the proteins causing allergic reactions are different. Conversely, people with peanut allergies may be able to eat tree nuts. Treating all nuts as the same category creates unnecessary dietary restrictions and potential safety issues. Many foods called nuts aren't nuts. Cashews are seeds of the cashew apple fruit. Brazil nuts are also seeds. Almonds are technically the seed inside a fruit pit. Pistachios are seeds. Only a few commonly eaten nuts are botanically true nuts. The culinary and botanical definitions don't align, creating widespread confusion. The myth persists because language doesn't follow botanical classifications. Culinary categories are based on usage and taste, not taxonomy. Peanuts are used like nuts in cooking, taste similar to nuts, and have nut-like texture. Calling them nuts works for cooking purposes, even though it's botanically wrong. Most people don't need to know the botanical classification to use peanuts appropriately, so the misconception doesn't cause practical problems and isn't corrected. Swallowing. Gum does not take 7 years to digest. Swallowed gum does not remain in your stomach for 7 years. This myth is completely false. Gum passes through the digestive system at roughly the same rate as other ingested materials, typically within a few days. While your body can't digest the gum base, it doesn't need to. The gum simply moves through the digestive tract and exits the body intact. The digestive system handles many indigestible materials regularly. Fiber, certain fruit skins, and other items pass through without being broken down. Gum is no different. The stomach and intestines use muscular contractions to move material along, regardless of whether that material can be digested. Gum won't stick to stomach walls or accumulate over years. It keeps moving until it exits naturally. The 7-year time frame is arbitrary and has no biological basis. The myth probably arose as a scare tactic to discourage children from swallowing gum, similar to myths about watermelon seeds growing in your stomach. Parents repeat the myth to encourage proper gum disposal, and children believe it because adults state it as fact. In rare cases involving young children who swallow massive amounts of gum along with other indigestible materials, intestinal blockages can occur. These cases require medical intervention, but are extremely uncommon and involve far more than accidentally swallowing a piece of gum. Normal gum swallowing poses no health risk. The myth persists despite lacking any medical foundation. Doctors regularly assure patients that swallowed gum is harmless, but the childhood teaching remains embedded in adult belief. Many adults who know intellectually that the myth is false still feel vaguely concerned about swallowing gum because the 7-year warning was drilled into them early. The forbidden fruit was not an apple. The Bible never identifies the forbidden fruit in Eden as an apple. The text simply refers to fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil without specifying the type. The association with apples is a later artistic and cultural tradition with no biblical basis. The fruit could have been anything, or could be purely symbolic rather than representing any real fruit. The apple association likely comes from Latin translation ambiguity. The Latin word malum means both evil and apple. When translating early texts, this word appeared in contexts discussing the forbidden fruit, and the double meaning may have contributed to the apple identification. European artists painting biblical scenes used familiar fruits in their depictions, and apples were common in European art. In Middle Eastern regions, where the Eden story originated, apples weren't particularly significant fruits. Figs, dates, pomegranates, and grapes were far more culturally important. Some scholars suggest pomegranates or figs as more likely symbolic fruits if the story references actual fruit types, but this is speculation. The text doesn't specify, and the fruit's identity isn't theologically important. The apple has become so associated with the Eden story that it appears in religious art, literature, and popular culture as established fact. Children learn about Adam, Eve, and the apple. The image is so entrenched that suggesting the forbidden fruit was something else feels like contradicting Scripture, even though Scripture never says apple. The myth matters because it demonstrates how cultural additions to religious texts become conflated with the actual text. Many things people believe are in religious scriptures actually aren't. The Bible never says money is the root of all evil. It says the love of money is. It never says God helps those who help themselves. It never specifies the number of wise men who visited Jesus. Cultural traditions and common misquotes become accepted as scripture without anyone checking the original text. Alcohol does not kill brain cells. Moderate alcohol consumption does not kill brain cells. Heavy, prolonged alcohol abuse can cause brain damage, but this damage results from nutritional deficiencies, particularly thiamine deficiency, rather than direct cell death from alcohol. The myth that alcohol kills brain cells has no scientific support at moderate consumption levels. Studies examining brain tissue from moderate drinkers show no reduction in brain cell numbers compared to non-drinkers. Heavy alcoholics do show brain tissue loss, but this results from Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome caused by thiamine deficiency that often accompanies chronic alcoholism, not from alcohol directly killing cells. The damage is preventable with proper nutrition. Alcohol does impair brain function temporarily, affecting judgment, coordination, and cognition while intoxicated. These effects result from alcohol's impact on neurotransmitter systems and cell signaling, not from cell death. Once alcohol is metabolized, brain function returns to normal. The temporary impairment makes alcohol feel brain damaging, leading to the myth that it kills cells. Excessive drinking does have real health consequences, including liver damage, increased cancer risk, and addiction potential. The brain cell myth isn't needed to justify moderate alcohol consumption recommendations. The actual health effects are serious enough without exaggerating alcohol's impact on brain cells. The myth persists as a cautionary warning, particularly toward young people. Saying alcohol kills brain cells sounds scarier and more permanent than saying it temporarily impairs function. The exaggeration is meant to discourage excessive drinking, but teaching false information undermines credibility when people learn the truth. Dogs do not age 7 years for every human year. The rule that 1 dog year equals 7 human years is a rough approximation that doesn't accurately reflect how dogs age. Dogs mature much faster in their first 2 years than this ratio suggests, and aging rates vary significantly by breed size. Small dogs age more slowly than large dogs in later life, making any single conversion ratio inherently inaccurate. A dog reaches sexual maturity around 1 year of age, equivalent to about 15 human years in developmental terms. By age 2, a dog is roughly equivalent to a 24-year-old human. After that, The aging rate slows and varies by size. Small dogs might age about 4 human years per calendar year. Large dogs age about 5 or 6 years per calendar year. The 7-to-1 ratio doesn't work at any life stage. The 7-year rule probably originated as a simple memory aid to remind owners that dogs have shorter lifespans and age faster than humans. It's easier to remember than complex charts showing how different breeds age at different rates. The simplification was never meant as precise calculation, but became treated as scientific fact. Veterinarians now use more sophisticated aging charts that account for breed size and individual years. These charts show the rapid early development followed by slower, size-dependent aging in adult years. The charts provide more accurate age equivalents for assessing appropriate medical care and life stage expectations. The myth persists because it's simple and provides a rough sense of dog aging, even though it's inaccurate. Pet owners don't need precise aging calculations for most purposes. The 7-year rule is good enough for casual understanding, so more accurate but complicated charts don't replace it in popular use. Chicken soup is not proven medicine for colds. Chicken soup has cultural significance for treating colds, but scientific evidence for its medicinal properties is weak. Studies show chicken soup may provide modest anti-inflammatory effects and that hot liquids can ease congestion, but these effects are minor and temporary. The benefits of chicken soup for colds are largely comfort and placebo effects rather than specific medical properties. Any hot liquid provides similar benefits for congestion and throat comfort. Tea, broth, or plain hot water would work, as well as chicken soup. The heat helps thin mucus and soothes irritated throat tissues. The liquid provides hydration, which is helpful when sick. These effects aren't unique to chicken soup. Some research suggests chicken soup has mild anti-inflammatory properties due to the combination of ingredients, particularly vegetables and chicken protein. However, these effects are small and wouldn't significantly alter cold duration or severity. The inflammation reduction from chicken soup is far less than from over-the-counter anti-inflammatory medications. The psychological and comfort benefits of chicken soup shouldn't be dismissed. Eating familiar comfort food when sick provides emotional support that may aid recovery indirectly through stress reduction. The placebo effect is real, and if believing chicken soup helps actually makes you feel better, that benefit exists even if it's not from the soup's chemical properties. The myth persists because chicken soup is associated with maternal care and cultural traditions around illness. The belief that it helps is self-reinforcing. People eat chicken soup when sick, they recover because colds resolve on their own, and they attribute recovery to the soup. The tradition continues across generations without rigorous evidence because it provides comfort regardless of medical efficacy. More people are not born during full moons. Extensive hospital data shows no correlation between birth rates and lunar phases. Full moons do not increase birth rates, despite persistent belief among medical professionals and the general public. Multiple large-scale studies have examined millions of births and found that births are evenly distributed across lunar cycles. The myth is so widespread that many doctors, nurses, and hospital staff believe it despite data contradicting it. They'll report that full moon nights seem busier, but actual records show no increase. This discrepancy comes from confirmation bias. Staff notice and remember busy full moon nights while forgetting quiet full moon nights and busy nights during other lunar phases. Human memory selectively notices coincidences that match expectations. When a full moon coincides with a busy night, it reinforces the belief. When a full moon coincides with a quiet night, it's dismissed as exception. When busy nights occur during other lunar phases, they're not remembered as contradicting the full moon theory because nobody was looking for lunar correlation. The moon does affect tides through gravitational pull, and since human bodies are mostly water, people assume the moon must affect human biology. However, tidal effects require vast water volumes. The gravitational pull on the small amount of water in a human body is negligible. If the moon affected human biology through gravity, the doctor standing next to a pregnant woman would have a stronger gravitational effect than the moon. The myth persists despite clear data because it's believed by healthcare workers who have authoritative-sounding anecdotes to share. When someone in a trusted profession says they've personally witnessed full moon birth surges, it carries more weight than statistical analysis showing no effect. Personal experience, even when based on false pattern recognition, feels more convincing than abstract data. Undercover police do not have to identify themselves. The widespread belief that undercover police officers must admit they're police if directly asked is completely false. This myth appears frequently in popular culture and is believed by many people, including criminals who apparently base their security on it. Undercover officers can and do lie about being police officers. That's the entire point of being undercover. The myth might originate from confusion about entrapment laws. Entrapment occurs when law enforcement induces someone to commit a crime they wouldn't otherwise commit. However, lying about being a police officer is not entrapment. Undercover officers can lie about their identity, participate in illegal activities to maintain cover, and gather evidence while concealing their law enforcement affiliation. If officers had to identify themselves when asked, undercover operations would be impossible. Drug dealers, organized crime members, and other criminals would simply ask, "Are you a cop?" before conducting business. No undercover investigation could succeed. The myth would make law enforcement completely ineffective against sophisticated criminal organizations. Criminals sometimes believe this myth and fail to take basic precautions because they think asking the magic question provides protection. This belief probably results from criminals passing the myth among themselves, possibly originating from someone misunderstanding entrapment laws or spreading deliberate misinformation. The myth's persistence among criminal populations actually aids law enforcement. The myth persists in popular culture because it creates dramatic tension in films and television shows. A character directly asking, "Are you a cop?" feels like a moment of truth. Fiction uses the trope without worrying about legal accuracy. Audiences absorb the myth from entertainment and assume it's true. The myth serves fictional narrative purposes, even though it's legally baseless. Diamonds are not rare. Diamonds are not rare gemstones. They're relatively abundant and are actually among the most common gemstones. The perception of diamond rarity and value is largely manufactured through controlled supply by the diamond industry, particularly De Beers, which historically controlled diamond mining and distribution to maintain artificially high prices. Diamonds are formed deep underground under high pressure and temperature conditions. These conditions are common in Earth's mantle. Volcanic activity brings diamonds to the surface through kimberlite pipes. These geological processes have deposited diamonds widely across the planet. Multiple diamond-bearing regions exist on every continent, producing millions of carats annually. De Beers controlled 90% of diamond production through most of the 1900s, carefully managing supply to maintain scarcity perception and high prices. They stockpiled diamonds, released them slowly to market, and ran marketing campaigns emphasizing rarity and exclusivity. The famous slogan, "A diamond is forever," was advertising created to establish diamonds as essential for engagement rings, a tradition that didn't exist in most cultures before the 1930s marketing campaign. Other gemstones are genuinely rarer than diamonds. Rubies, emeralds, sapphires, and tanzanite are all less common than diamonds. Quality examples of these stones often exceed diamond prices. Diamonds became the dominant gemstone for jewelry through marketing rather than rarity, creating cultural expectations that engagement rings require diamonds. The myth persists because the diamond industry continues controlling supply and marketing. Synthetic diamonds, which are chemically identical to natural diamonds, can be produced in factories, further demonstrating that diamonds aren't rare. The industry resists synthetic diamond competition by emphasizing natural origins, even though the stones are indistinguishable without specialized testing. Rarity is more brand positioning than geological reality. Rust does not cause tetanus. Rust doesn't cause tetanus. The tetanus bacteria, Clostridium tetani, lives in soil, dust, and manure. Rusty objects are dangerous for tetanus, not because rust causes the disease, but because rust indicates an old outdoor object likely contaminated with soil containing tetanus bacteria. The rust itself is harmless regarding tetanus. It's the bacterial contamination that matters. A deep puncture from a clean new nail carries tetanus risk if the wound environment becomes oxygen-free, allowing tetanus bacteria to grow. A shallow scratch from a rusty nail might carry less risk if the wound is cleaned properly and exposed to air. The wound characteristics and bacterial presence matter more than rust. Tetanus bacteria are anaerobic, meaning they thrive without oxygen. Deep puncture wounds create oxygen-deprived environments where tetanus bacteria can grow and produce toxins. Shallow, well-cleaned wounds exposed to air don't provide conditions for tetanus growth. Wound depth and oxygen access are more important than what caused the wound. The association between rust and tetanus arose because rusty objects are often old, dirty, and have been outside where soil bacteria contaminate them. Rusty nails, barbed wire, and old farm equipment are common tetanus infection sources, not because they're rusty, but because they've been exposed to contaminated soil. The rust is a marker of bacterial exposure, not the cause of disease. The myth persists because it's simpler to warn about rusty nails than to explain bacterial contamination and wound characteristics. Parents tell children to avoid rusty nails to prevent tetanus, and the warning works even though the explanation is wrong. The myth functions as useful shorthand for legitimate danger, so correcting it feels unnecessary even though the actual infection mechanism is different. Antibiotics do not treat viral infections. Antibiotics are completely ineffective against viral infections like colds, flu, and COVID-19. Antibiotics kill bacteria or inhibit bacterial growth. They have no effect on viruses, which are fundamentally different biological entities with different structures and replication methods. Taking antibiotics for viral infections wastes medicine and contributes to antibiotic resistance without providing any benefit. Despite this being well-established medical fact, patients frequently request and sometimes receive antibiotic prescriptions for viral infections. Surveys show many people believe antibiotics treat colds and flu. Some doctors prescribe antibiotics for viral infections due to patient pressure, concern about secondary bacterial infections, or diagnostic uncertainty, even though the prescription is medically inappropriate. The confusion arises partly because bacterial and viral infections can cause similar symptoms. Sore throats, coughs, and congestion can result from either bacteria or viruses. Distinguishing between them requires testing or clinical judgment. Patients assume antibiotics are appropriate because they don't understand the bacterial versus viral distinction. Antibiotic resistance is a serious public health threat worsened by inappropriate antibiotic use. When antibiotics are used unnecessarily, resistant bacteria have more opportunity to develop and spread. Individual patients don't experience immediate harm from unnecessary antibiotics, but the collective effect of widespread misuse is growing antibiotic resistance that threatens everyone. The myth persists because antibiotics seem like powerful medicine that should work against all infections. People feel they're doing something active to fight illness by taking antibiotics rather than passively waiting for viral infections to resolve. The psychological comfort of taking medicine drives antibiotic demand even when antibiotics provide no medical benefit. Different types of alcohol do not make you feel different. The belief that different types of alcohol produce different emotional effects, tequila makes you crazy, wine makes you sleepy, beer makes you relaxed, is not supported by science. Alcohol is alcohol. The ethanol in beer, wine, and spirits is chemically identical. Any behavioral differences come from setting, expectation, drinking speed, and alcohol content, not from the type of drink. People believe tequila makes them wild because they drink tequila at parties, where wild behavior is expected and encouraged. They drink wine relaxing at home and feel relaxed. They drink beer socially at moderate pace and feel social. The alcohol isn't causing these different effects. The contexts and expectations are. The same amount of ethanol consumed at the same rate would produce identical physiological effects regardless of beverage type. Congeners, compounds other than ethanol that result from fermentation, differ between drinks and affect taste and hangover severity. Darker drinks with more congeners cause worse hangovers, but congeners don't create different moods or behavioral effects during drinking. The ethanol content determines intoxication, not the beverage type. Carbonated alcoholic drinks, like champagne, are absorbed slightly faster than non-carbonated drinks, potentially creating quicker intoxication. Sugary drinks mask alcohol taste, potentially leading to faster consumption. These effects relate to drinking patterns and absorption rates, not to inherent properties making different alcohols produce different emotional states. The myth persists because people's experiences feel real, and they attribute their behavior and emotions to the drink rather than the situation. When someone drinks tequila at a wild party and feels crazy, the tequila gets credit even though the party environment caused the behavior. The myth is reinforced every time someone drinks a particular alcohol in a particular context and experiences predictable effects. Breakfast is not necessarily the most important meal. The slogan that breakfast is the most important meal of the day was created by cereal marketing campaigns, not established by nutrition science. Eating breakfast can be healthy, but it's not uniquely important compared to other meals. Nutrition research shows that what matters is overall daily nutrition quality and quantity, not specifically eating in the morning. Some people function better eating breakfast, others prefer intermittent fasting or simply don't feel hungry in the morning. Forcing breakfast when not hungry doesn't provide health benefits. The idea that everyone must eat breakfast to be healthy is overgeneralized and doesn't reflect individual variation in hunger patterns and metabolism. The breakfast emphasis comes from early 1900s, marketing by cereal companies like Kellogg's promoting breakfast cereal consumption. Public health messaging adopted the breakfast importance message, and it became nutritional conventional wisdom without strong scientific foundation. The marketing campaign succeeded so well that breakfast importance feels like obvious health truth rather than recognizing its commercial origin. Studies comparing breakfast eaters to breakfast skippers show mixed results. Some find associations between breakfast eating and better health outcomes, but these studies don't prove causation. People who eat breakfast might have other healthy habits creating the observed benefits. Randomized trials don't consistently show breakfast eating causes health improvements. The myth persists because it's entrenched in nutrition advice, parenting wisdom, and cultural practice. Schools emphasize breakfast importance. Parents insist children eat breakfast. The message is repeated so consistently that questioning it feels like advocating for unhealthy behavior. The commercial origins of the breakfast message are forgotten, leaving it seeming like established medical fact rather than effective marketing. Cracking knuckles does not cause arthritis. This myth was covered earlier, but deserves emphasis given how widespread the belief remains. Multiple studies definitively show no connection between habitual knuckle cracking and arthritis development. The satisfying pop comes from gas bubbles in joint fluid, not from damage. Decades of research have failed to find any causal relationship between knuckle cracking and joint disease. The myth functions as a parental warning to stop annoying behavior rather than as legitimate health concern. Children crack knuckles, adults find it annoying. Claiming it causes arthritis provides authoritative-sounding justification to make children stop. The medical claim adds weight that wouldn't exist if parents simply said they find the sound irritating. One physician famously cracked only his left hand's knuckles for over 50 years to test this myth on himself. He developed arthritis in neither hand and saw no differences between hands. While this N=1 experiment isn't rigorous science, it demonstrates the myth's baselessness and the physician's willingness to test folk medical beliefs through personal experiment. The disconnect between research findings and persistent belief illustrates how folk medicine resists scientific correction. People taught as children that knuckle cracking causes arthritis grow up believing it, teach it to their children, and dismiss contradictory research. The belief has social functions beyond medical accuracy, which helps explain its persistence. Medical professionals sometimes don't bother correcting this myth because it's harmless and might reduce knuckle cracking, which some find annoying even though it's not dangerous. The myth serves social purposes that outweigh accuracy concerns, allowing it to persist despite being debunked. You cannot get sick from being cold. Being cold does not directly cause illness. Colds and flu are caused by viruses, not by cold temperature exposure. You can only get sick if exposed to viruses, regardless of temperature. The association between cold weather and illness comes from behavioral changes in winter rather than temperature directly causing disease. Respiratory virus transmission increases in winter because people spend more time indoors in close proximity, facilitating person-to-person spread. Indoor heating reduces humidity, which may help viruses survive in the air longer. Some viruses are more stable in cold, dry conditions. These environmental and behavioral factors increase winter illness rates, not cold exposure itself. Experimental studies where subjects are exposed to cold and then exposed to cold viruses show that cold exposure doesn't increase infection rates or symptom severity. Cold stress doesn't meaningfully suppress immune function in healthy individuals. The immune system functions normally across wide temperature ranges. The myth probably originated from the observation that people get sick more often in winter and the reasonable but incorrect assumption that cold weather causes the illness. The correlation between cold and illness is real, but the causation goes through behavioral changes and viral transmission patterns rather than cold temperature directly causing disease. The myth persists because it's reinforced by parents telling children to dress warmly to avoid getting sick. The advice to dress warmly is good for preventing hypothermia and discomfort, but the disease prevention justification is false. People who get sick after being cold assume causation, not recognizing they were exposed to viruses coincidentally. Humans did not evolve from chimpanzees. Humans did not evolve from modern chimpanzees. Humans and chimpanzees evolved from a common ancestor that lived approximately 6 million years ago. That ancestor was neither human nor chimpanzee. Both species evolved along separate lineages from that common ancestor, adapting to different environments and developing different traits. The misconception comes from misunderstanding evolutionary trees. Evolution isn't a ladder with humans at the top. It's a branching tree where lineages split and diverge. Chimpanzees are our closest living relatives, sharing about 98.8% of DNA, but they're cousins, not ancestors. We share a grandfather, but had different parents. Modern chimpanzees have been evolving for the same length of time as humans, 6 million years since the lineages split. They're not frozen ancestors waiting for humans to evolve from them. They've been adapting to their environments just as humans have, developing their own specialized traits and behaviors. The common ancestor would have been more primitive than either modern humans or chimpanzees. It probably had some ape-like characteristics, but wasn't identical to any living species. Reconstructing what this ancestor looked like requires examining fossil evidence and comparing traits across living primates. The myth that humans evolved from chimpanzees is often used to attack evolution theory, creating the false dilemma that if we evolved from chimps, why are there still chimps? This misrepresents evolutionary theory, which doesn't predict that ancestral species disappear when descendant species emerge. Multiple lineages can coexist, which is why primates exist in great diversity today. The myth persists because evolutionary relationships are complex and counterintuitive. The tree metaphor requires spatial reasoning that doesn't match most people's intuitive understanding. Simplified statements about humans and apes being related get misinterpreted as direct ancestry rather than common ancestry, and the nuance is lost. Frankenstein is not the monster's name. In Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, Dr. Victor Frankenstein is the scientist who creates the monster. The monster itself is never given a name. Popular culture has conflated creator and creation, with Frankenstein being used to refer to the monster, when actually Frankenstein is the doctor who made him. The monster is often called Frankenstein's monster or the creature, but not Frankenstein. This mistake is so widespread that correcting it feels pedantic. Most people know Frankenstein as the monster's name. Halloween costumes, movies, and cultural references use Frankenstein to mean the monster. The original distinction has been lost through repetition and simplification. Some argue that the misnaming is thematically appropriate. The novel explores questions of creation, responsibility, and identity. The monster struggles with being nameless and rejected by his creator. In some interpretations, the monster taking or being given his creator's name represents their intertwined fates and the creator's responsibility for his creation. The novel never provides the monster with a name, referring to him as creature, wretch, demon, and other descriptive terms. This namelessness emphasizes the monster's isolation and lack of identity. Giving him his creator's name, even accidentally through cultural confusion, ironically addresses one of the novel's central themes. The myth persists because the distinction between creator and creation doesn't matter for most casual references. When people say Frankenstein, everyone understands they mean the monster, even though it's technically wrong. Language evolves through use, and if enough people use Frankenstein to mean the monster, that becomes a valid meaning regardless of the original text. You use more than 10% of your brain. This myth was covered earlier, but bears repeating with additional detail. The 10% myth is one of the most persistent neuroscience misconceptions. Brain imaging clearly shows extensive neural activity throughout the brain during various tasks. No brain regions sit completely unused. Even during sleep, the brain shows significant activity across all regions. The brain's energy consumption proves extensive usage. The brain represents about 2% of body weight, but consumes roughly 20% of the body's energy. Evolution wouldn't maintain such an expensive organ if 90% of it served no purpose. Natural selection would have reduced brain size if most of it were unnecessary. Brain damage studies definitively prove all brain regions serve functions. Strokes, tumors, and injuries to any brain region cause measurable deficits. There are no safe brain areas where damage is consequence-free. If 90% of the brain were unused, damage to those areas wouldn't matter. Yet neurosurgeons know that all brain regions are functional territory. Different brain regions activate for different tasks, but over time, all regions show activity. The brain doesn't use everything simultaneously, but it cycles through all regions depending on current demands. Saying you only use 10% is like saying you only use 10% of your home because you're only in one room at a time. The myth's appeal lies in suggesting untapped potential. If you're only using 10% of your brain, imagine what you could do with 100%. This fantasy drives markets for brain training programs, nootropics, and various schemes claiming to unlock dormant brain capacity. The truth that you're already using all your brain is less marketable. Reading in dim light does not permanently damage eyes. Reading in dim light may cause eye strain, fatigue, and temporary discomfort, but it does not cause permanent eye damage. The eye muscles work harder to focus in low light, which can cause tiredness and headaches, but this doesn't harm the eyes long term. Once you rest your eyes or improve lighting, any discomfort disappears without lasting effects. The myth probably originated from parents trying to protect children's developing eyes and encourage proper study habits. Telling children that reading in the dark damages eyes provides motivation to use adequate lighting and gives health-based justification for parental rules about study conditions. Eye doctors consistently report that dim light reading doesn't cause permanent damage. The eye is remarkably resilient and adaptive. While good lighting makes reading more comfortable and reduces fatigue, inadequate lighting doesn't destroy vision. Many people who read extensively in poor lighting conditions throughout their lives show no vision problems attributable to that habit. The confusion may stem from association rather than causation. Many people who develop vision problems also read frequently, and some of that reading occurred in less than ideal lighting. They incorrectly attribute vision problems to dim light reading, when actually the problems result from genetics, age, or other factors. The myth persists because eye strain from dim light reading feels harmful, and people assume that discomfort indicates damage. The distinction between temporary strain and permanent damage isn't intuitive. If something hurts, it seems logical that it's causing harm, even when the discomfort is temporary and non-damaging. Poinsettias are not deadly poisonous. Poinsettias are not deadly poisonous plants. They may cause mild stomach upset if eaten in large quantities, but they're not the dangerous poison commonly believed. The myth that poinsettias are lethally toxic has no scientific basis. Studies show that poinsettia ingestion rarely causes significant problems, even in children and pets. The Poison Control Center receives thousands of poinsettia exposure calls annually, primarily around Christmas when the plants are common decorations. These cases overwhelmingly result in no symptoms or only mild effects. There are no confirmed deaths from poinsettia ingestion. The plant's toxicity has been greatly exaggerated. The myth's origin is unclear, but might relate to confusing poinsettias with genuinely toxic plants that have similar appearance. Alternatively, the myth might have started from a single misattributed death in 1919, where a child allegedly died after eating poinsettia leaves, though documentation is uncertain and the death may have had other causes. Plant experts and poison control centers have worked for decades to correct the poinsettia myth, but it persists. Parents are warned about poinsettia dangers during holidays. Pet owners worry about their animals accessing the plants. The warnings are disproportionate to actual risk, yet they continue. The myth's persistence might be beneficial despite being false. If believing poinsettias are poisonous makes people keep plants away from children and pets who might have adverse reactions to eating leaves, the myth prevents actual problems, even though the feared outcome is exaggerated. Bats are not blind. This myth was covered earlier, but deserves re-emphasis given how embedded the phrase blind as a bat is in language. All bat species can see. Megabats like fruit bats have excellent vision, rivaling many other mammals. Even microbats that rely heavily on echolocation have functional vision that they use for navigation and orientation. The myth originated from observations that bats fly successfully in complete darkness where human vision fails. Early observers assumed bats must be blind and using alternative senses. The discovery of echolocation reinforced the myth by providing an explanation for nighttime navigation that didn't require vision. Experiments demonstrate bat vision clearly. Bats can visually discriminate between shapes, colors, and patterns. They use vision for long-range navigation, choosing flight paths based on visual landmarks. They switch to echolocation for short-range obstacle avoidance and prey capture. The two senses complement each other. The misconception matters because it creates fundamental misunderstandings about bat biology. Treating bats as blind misrepresents their sensory ecology. It also perpetuates negative stereotypes about bats as strange or defective creatures, rather than highly adapted animals with sophisticated sensory systems. The phrase blind as a bat survives despite being factually incorrect because idioms are remarkably resistant to updating. Language preserves phrases long after the beliefs that generated them have been abandoned. Everyone knows what blind as a bat means, even if nobody believes bats are actually blind. People did not use only 10% of their brains. This myth appears multiple times in this script because it's so pervasive and so thoroughly wrong that it merits repeated debunking. The 10% myth has been used to sell brain training programs, self-help books, and pseudoscientific therapies claiming to unlock unused potential. Brain imaging definitively refutes the myth. PET scans, fMRI, and other imaging technologies show that over a day's activities, virtually all brain regions activate. There are no large dormant sections waiting to be accessed. Even during sleep, significant neural activity occurs throughout the brain. The myth's appeal is psychological rather than scientific. Believing you're using only 10% of your brain implies enormous untapped potential. It's more comforting than the reality that you're already using all your brain, and improvements require hard work rather than simply turning on dormant capacity. Some proponents of the 10% myth cite examples of people with brain damage who function normally, suggesting unused brain regions can compensate. This misunderstands neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize after damage. Compensation occurs through remaining brain tissue working harder and forming new connections, not through activating previously unused regions. The myth's persistence, despite comprehensive debunking, demonstrates how appealing myths can resist scientific correction. Even people aware of the evidence against the 10% myth sometimes continue believing it because the idea resonates emotionally with desires for self-improvement and human potential. Walt Disney was not frozen. Walt Disney was not cryogenically frozen after death. He was cremated in accordance with his wishes. The myth that Disney was frozen to be revived in the future has no basis in fact. Disney's death certificate, funeral arrangements, and family statements all confirm conventional cremation. The myth probably originated soon after Disney's death in 1966, coinciding with increased public interest in cryonics. Disney's futuristic vision, his creation of Tomorrowland, and his reputation for technological optimism made the freezing story plausible. People wanted to believe Disney might return in the future. Cryonics facilities deny ever freezing Disney. The company that later became known for cryopreservation, Alcor, wasn't operational until 1972, 6 years after Disney died. The first human cryopreservation occurred in 1967, months after Disney's death. Disney couldn't have been frozen because the technology wasn't available when he died. The myth serves as an urban legend about a famous figure, similar to myths about various celebrities faking their deaths. These stories persist because they're interesting, suggest secret knowledge, and are difficult to definitively disprove since absence of evidence isn't conclusive proof. The Disney freezing myth demonstrates how myths about famous people can originate without basis and persist for decades despite being easily checked. Disney's actual death and funeral were public record from the beginning, yet the myth survived because it's more interesting than the mundane truth. Humans have more than 5 senses. This myth was touched on earlier but deserves fuller exploration. The traditional 5 senses model is a dramatic oversimplification of human sensory systems. Proprioception tells you where your body parts are without looking. Equilibrioception provides balance and spatial orientation. Thermoception detects temperature. Nociception detects pain. These are distinct sensory systems, not subcategories of touch. Interoception monitors internal body states, hunger, thirst, needing to urinate, heartbeat awareness, breathing, and visceral sensations. These internal senses continuously inform the brain about body conditions, allowing homeostatic regulation. They're essential for survival, but aren't included in the traditional 5 senses. Touch itself isn't a single sense, but multiple sensory systems lumped together. Different receptors detect pressure, vibration, texture, temperature, and pain. These use different neural pathways and serve different functions. Treating them as one sense of touch obscures the complexity of cutaneous sensation. The five-sense model originated with Aristotle over 2,000 years ago based on observable organs: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. This pre-scientific classification stuck because it's simple and memorable. Modern neuroscience recognizes far more sensory systems, but updating common understanding requires changing deep-rooted educational frameworks. The persistence of the five-sense model demonstrates how foundational concepts in education, even when wrong, resist updating. Teachers teach five senses because that's what they learned. Textbooks describe five senses because that's standard curriculum. The model is simple enough for children to grasp, which perpetuates it despite being incomplete. Bulls are not enraged by the color red. This myth was covered earlier but bears repeating with additional context. Bulls are colorblind to red and respond to the cape's movement, not its color. The myth persists because bullfighting traditions use red capes and audiences assume the color matters when it doesn't. Scientific testing of cattle color vision confirms they have dichromatic vision, similar to humans with red-green color blindness. They see blues and yellows well, but can't distinguish red from other colors. To a bull, a red cape appears grayish or brownish, depending on lighting, indistinguishable from other dull colors. Matadors could use bright blue or green capes with identical results. The bull charges at movement because the fluttering cape triggers instinctive responses to novel stimuli and potential threats. Bulls charge relatively slowly compared to the dramatic portrayals in media, and matadors control the encounter through cape positioning rather than color. The myth's global persistence, despite being easily testable, reflects how cultural traditions override empirical reality. Bullfighting uses red capes by tradition, and tradition doesn't require rational justification. The red color is for human audiences, not bull psychology. This myth illustrates how assumptions about animal perception project human sensory experience onto other species. Humans have strong responses to red, so people assume bulls do too. Understanding that different animals perceive colors differently requires scientific knowledge that contradicts intuitive assumptions. Medieval chastity belts are mostly a Victorian invention. The iconic medieval chastity belt, supposedly locked onto women during the Crusades to ensure fidelity, is mostly a myth created by Victorian-era storytelling. There's little credible evidence that chastity belts were actually used in the medieval period. The few examples in museums are either proven fakes made centuries after the medieval period or objects of uncertain provenance. Medieval documents make no reliable references to chastity belts. If they were common, medieval literature, legal records, medical texts, or artistic depictions would mention them. They don't. The silence is particularly notable given how extensively medieval society documented other aspects of life and social control. If chastity belts existed and were used, someone would have written about them. The chastity belt myth gained traction in the Victorian era when people were fascinated by medieval times, but understood them poorly. Victorian writers and museum curators created or misidentified objects as medieval chastity belts, and these inventions became accepted as genuine artifacts. The myth served Victorian interests in portraying earlier eras as more barbaric and sexually repressive than Victorian society. Most supposed medieval chastity belts in museum collections have been identified as 19th century fakes or objects made for other purposes. Actual medieval belts existed for carrying keys, money, or as fashion accessories, but not for enforcing chastity. The locked metal underwear design is impractical, dangerous, and would cause serious health problems if worn for extended periods. The myth persists because it's dramatic, fits popular misconceptions about medieval treatment of women, and has been repeated in books, films, and museums for over a century. The image of the chastity belt has become so culturally entrenched that correcting it requires not just explaining the lack of evidence, but dismantling a symbol that people believe represents historical reality. Lightning never strikes twice is false. This myth was addressed earlier but deserves additional emphasis. Lightning frequently strikes the same locations repeatedly. Any place that was favorable for a lightning strike once will likely be favorable again under similar conditions. Tall structures, elevated points, and conductive materials attract lightning consistently. The Empire State Building is struck by lightning approximately 25 times per year. Lightning rods are installed specifically because certain locations are repeatedly struck. If lightning never struck the same place twice, lightning protection systems would be unnecessary after the first strike, which is obviously not the case. Lightning follows the laws of physics, not probability. It takes the path of least resistance from cloud to ground. If a structure provides the most favorable path during one storm, it will likely provide favorable paths during future storms with similar conditions. Height, conductivity, and isolation make certain locations preferential strike targets. Individual people have been struck by lightning multiple times. Roy Sullivan, a park ranger, was struck 7 times over his career and survived all strikes. While his case is exceptional, multiple strike survivors are not as rare as the myth suggests. The myth confuses statistical improbability with physical impossibility. The saying, "lightning never strikes twice," is intended as metaphor, suggesting that unlikely events won't repeat. But taken literally, it's wrong. Lightning behavior is predictable based on physics and geography. The meteorological phenomena that cause one strike create conditions for subsequent strikes in the same locations. Cinco de Mayo is not Mexican Independence Day. Many Americans believe Cinco de Mayo celebrates Mexican independence, but it doesn't. Mexican Independence Day is September 16th, commemorating the start of the War for Independence from Spain in 1810. Cinco de Mayo commemorates the Battle of Puebla on May 5, 1862, when Mexican forces defeated French invaders. The Battle of Puebla was significant militarily, but didn't end the conflict. France continued occupying Mexico for years after the battle. Cinco de Mayo celebrates a specific victory rather than independence or the end of occupation. In Mexico, it's a relatively minor holiday observed primarily in the state of Puebla, where the battle occurred. In the United States, Cinco de Mayo has become a major celebration of Mexican-American culture, much bigger than it is in Mexico. American marketing and commercial interests have promoted Cinco de Mayo as a major holiday, often with little understanding of its historical significance. Many Americans celebrate without knowing what the date commemorates. The confusion between Cinco de Mayo and Mexican Independence Day reflects how cultural traditions change when transplanted to new contexts. Mexican Americans created new traditions around Cinco de Mayo that diverged from its significance in Mexico. These American celebrations are valid cultural expressions, even though they're based on historical misunderstanding. The myth persists because most Americans never learn Mexican history beyond stereotypes and simplified narratives. Cinco de Mayo provides an excuse for celebration without requiring historical knowledge. Correcting the Independence Day confusion requires teaching Mexican history, which most American education systems don't prioritize. Bumblebees flying does not violate physics. The myth that bumblebees shouldn't be able to fly according to physics is based on outdated aerodynamic calculations that made incorrect assumptions. Bumblebees fly perfectly in accordance with physics. The myth arose from applying fixed-wing aircraft aerodynamics to insect flight, which doesn't work because insects don't fly like airplanes. In the 1930s, an engineer reportedly made a quick calculation treating a bumblebee's wings as fixed airfoils. By those calculations, the wings didn't generate enough lift for flight. This calculation was done informally, possibly as a joke or thought experiment, but it was repeated and exaggerated into the claim that bumblebees flying violates physics. The original calculation was never meant as serious analysis and was known to be wrong almost immediately. Bumblebees don't fly like airplanes. They generate lift through complex wing motions, creating vortices that produce far more lift than static wing theory predicts. High-speed photography and computational fluid dynamics have completely explained how bumblebees fly. Their wings move in a figure-8 pattern, generating dynamic lift through unsteady aerodynamics. The physics is complicated, but perfectly consistent with aerodynamic principles. The myth persists as an inspirational metaphor. Bumblebees don't know they can't fly, so they fly anyway, suggesting that ignorance of limitations enables achievement. The metaphor has value, even though the factual basis is completely wrong. Bumblebees don't violate physics. They demonstrate physics we didn't fully understand when the myth originated. This myth matters because it misrepresents how science works. Science doesn't declare things impossible and then get proven wrong by nature. When observations contradict theory, scientists update theory to match observations. The bumblebee myth suggests science rigidly clings to flawed theories despite contradictory evidence, when actually the bumblebee flight calculations were recognized as flawed almost immediately, and proper aerodynamic analysis explained bee flight decades ago. The myths we've examined tonight share common patterns. They spread because they're simple, memorable, and emotionally or narratively satisfying. They persist because correcting them requires effort, and most people never encounter the corrections. They resist debunking because admitting you believe something false feels uncomfortable, especially if you've repeated it to others or built understanding on top of it. What you've heard tonight challenges dozens of things you probably believed with confidence. That's not an attack on your intelligence or education. It's recognition that human knowledge transmission is imperfect and that myths travel faster than facts. You inherited most of your beliefs about the world from parents, teachers, media, and culture, none of whom deliberately misled you, but all of whom inherited the same myths and passed them forward. The question now is what you do with these corrections. You can dismiss them, defending what you've always believed against new information. You can accept them, but forget them by tomorrow, reverting to comfortable myths. Or you can let this be the beginning of questioning other things you've never thought to question. Most of what you know is probably correct, but some of it isn't. The only way to find out which is to check. The world is stranger and more interesting than the myths suggest. Vikings without horned helmets are more impressive, not less, when you understand their actual culture and achievements. Napoleon as average height is more remarkable, not less, when his military genius isn't explained away by compensating for shortness. Glass that's solid is more mysterious, not less, when you understand amorphous materials. The truth doesn't need embellishment to be fascinating. As you drift off now, wherever you are, whatever time your clock shows, consider that the world you think you know contains layers of myth you've never examined. The familiar facts of daily life, the things everyone knows, the obvious truths. Some of them aren't true. Some have never been true. They're cultural myths that spread because they're useful, or compelling, or simple, not because they're accurate. Sleep well, knowing that what you believe about the world is closer to truth than it was an hour ago. But remember, there are thousands more myths out there, believed by millions, repeated confidently, and completely false. The 50 we've covered are just the beginning. The world is full of things that everyone knows that simply aren't so. Questioning them is how understanding improves. Accepting them is how myths persist. Rest easy tonight with a mind slightly less burdened by misconception. Tomorrow the world will look subtly different, knowing that some of what you thought were facts were actually fiction. That's progress. That's how knowledge advances. One debunked myth at a time, we get closer to understanding what's actually true. Good night.